Welcome to the Take a Mulligan podcast with your hosts, Brian and Kenny Mulligan. We hope to encourage you not to quit and keep going. If you're at that place where you just want to stop and give up, don't. Second chances can happen. Try again and take a mulligan.
Well, hey, welcome back to the Take a Mulligan podcast. We are so great you're joining with us. And today we're going to talk about, well, hopefully we'll have a little fun with this topic, but we talk about fitness, faith, family, and friends. And today we're going to probably mesh them all together, but we really want to hit on the faith topic. And maybe it's not faith in what you think about. Maybe it's faith a little bit more broader, and hopefully you understand as we go on. But Brian and I were recently at a seminar, 3-day seminar, which was like pretty intense. But one of the opening comments that was there that was talked about was the comment is, we don't know what we don't know. And the host there was asking that question for quite a long time. He's like, what did he ask us, Brian? He said, what do you know that you don't know? And everybody's trying to come up with answers. Well, I didn't know. He's like, but you know that you didn't know that, right? Like saying, well, I don't know about health, or I don't know about fitness, but you know that you don't know about health or fitness. What do you know that you don't know, right? And so what was the conclusion? Do you remember what we all came up with?
It was basically, we don't know.
We don't know. Yeah,
Right.
we totally don't know, which is like mind-boggling. So, maybe you guys out there listening is like, what are some of the things that you don't know that you don't know? What are they? So maybe what are some of the things that you heard and then you thought this was true, or you thought it was false? Like, okay, you just believe, oh no, that's false. And then later you found out that, oh no, I was wrong. Like that was totally true and I believed it was false, or that was totally a lie and I've been believing it was true all this time, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of things we've done, and Brian, I'm sure you got some here. So what comes to your mind when you think of that? Like, what are some things that you, like, I don't know, just blew you away? You're like, I can't believe that. Like, that's like unbelievable, right?
Yeah, well, I'll try to be sensitive to our listeners' ages here, but when we think about Christmas and some of the things that we believe at Christmas time,
That's
and we start
true.
to second guess, like, is he real? Is he not real? And then all of a sudden we find out, I had a feeling, but now I know. And I think,
Yeah.
we all handled that one differently. I know as a parent, it was kind of weird. Because I think you're you're kind of leading your kids on to be deceived, and it's all in good fun. It's not to harm them or anything, but I mean, that's probably a good example, right? Is Santa
Yeah.
Claus,
Yeah. Yep.
and what comes across that way now from the parents' perspective of, did we just deceive our children, or are we just kind of playing along? Did they get deceived by
Yeah.
that? So I think that's kind of an interesting thing
I think we
to
should
put
come
out there.
back. We should go back to that topic when it gets closer to Christmas, huh? Because then they all fall down the line, right? The Easter Bunny, the
Yeah,
Tooth
right.
Fairy, and the Great Pumpkin too is in that mix, right? Yeah. So, so I remember like some of the things, like actually you hear all this stuff about the Brady Bunch. Like we used to watch that show when we
Mhm.
were kids, right? And then you're like, wait a minute, that was going on the Brady Bunch or something like that.
Yeah.
I remember one of our TV shows that my wife Julie and I used to watch all the time was we used to watch Castle, the TV show
Yeah,
Castle, where
great
he's a
show.
detective, right? And to find out like later, like those guys didn't like each other at all. And it's like, really, like you would have never known that from watching it, right? You're just like, no, these guys, like,
Yeah.
they're in love and all that, but they're actors, right? That's what they do.
So
So there's
then
some
that
other.
whole world can be deceptive, right?
It
I mean,
is,
it's built to entertain us, but at the same time, it's like you said, it looks like they're getting along. It looks like it's this great family, and then you find out there's all these issues behind the scenes that you never knew. So they put on a
Yeah,
really, really good facade. So they're either really good at acting or they're just really bad at doing life. I'm not sure which, to
maybe a
not be able to get
combination.
along with the people that they're around. But I mean, you hear that all the time. You hear that with, celebrities and singers, and sometimes you'll hear that they have this, I forget what they call that, when they have their whole list of what they need for a concert, and they need all these things, certain temperature in the room, and certain kind of
I know.
furniture, and like
I only
all
drink
these
warm
things,
water.
and it's yeah, and it's like, I can only eat this food before the concert, and this food after the concert. If you don't get this, I'm not going to be happy, and all these expectations, and at the end of the day, it's like, it's a human being trying to associate with another human being, and yet they seem like they're better than the other people. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of that stuff becomes very deceptive, and I think when it comes to the entertainment world, we don't really want to accept that. We don't really want to, because we know that that's going to change the whole facade of what we're trying
Yeah.
to watch or what we're trying to engage in and what we're trying to follow.
Well, I've often used that in illustrations when I speak is our perception of an actor. Like we say, oh man, I really like Harrison Ford, or I really like Julia Roberts, whatever, whoever your actress is, right? Although we use the word actor now for everybody. I don't get that. But anyway, um, and yet it's like, yeah, but how, you don't know who they are. Like even when they do an interview, they're acting, right? I mean, it's very rare that you see the real side of an actor and actress, and it takes
Yeah.
years to really see that real person come from. And it's really neat when you do see a real story where you're like, oh my goodness, they've been in a marriage for 45 years. It's their first marriage. And and you hear some really good stuff about, so what we were seeing was real, like it wasn't fake or anything like this. But
Yeah.
our perception of them comes from the movies we watch, right? We're like, oh, we didn't like them in that movie because that's not the real them, or something like that. So yeah, we're totally caught off guard, right? Or as we're talking about today, about we're deceived. We're deceived into
Yeah.
something that's not real, but we believe it to be real, right? So there's other things you remember, like getting like blown away, like I can't believe like that was true.
Another thing that comes to mind is I remember history class. I think it was junior year in high school, maybe it was senior year. I can't remember which year, but I just remember I was so excited. We finally got to American history, like U.S. world history, like World War One, World War Two time. Hoping to always get up to like Vietnam and all that kind of stuff. Of course, we never get there. But I just remember when we were learning about World War One, I had a great history teacher, and we started learning about it and how it started, and then all of a sudden this other piece came into play that I was like, wait a minute. And what they talked about was how the media and the propaganda started going and talking about like, hey, this country's bad, this is what happened, this isn't what happened. And then all that came out and they realized a lot of that was just propaganda. And that was, I mean, I'm sure that wasn't the start of propaganda, but in my world as a junior, senior in high school, that was the first time I ever understood what propaganda was and how it influences things in such huge ways. And so I was really disheartened because I'm like, are you kidding me? This is really what happens? Like the media can control what happens in a war? That
Hmm.
seems so crazy to me. And it took me a while to kind of learn that and figure that out. And I honestly had a hard time with believing that because I just didn't know that's the way the world worked. And I guess from that war, it became very obvious. I don't really remember all the details of how that played into that war specifically. But then again, it happened in World War II, and I'm sure every other war. So now you fast forward, like with that little piece of media, and you fast forward where we are today, and it's just a whole world different.
Yeah,
Not to get on either side of it, but just to put out the facts there that the media controls most
yeah,
of what we see, most of what we are supposed to believe or supposed to know. Even
yeah,
the media is controlling what we're supposed to know. So if they don't report on it or they report wrongly on it, then we're just supposed to, as consumers, believe that.
yeah,
I just
yeah.
heard somebody just said the other day that there's the average is 3 minutes of news that people watch.
Wow.
Average.
And so our
So if
whole
you watch
opinions get
only
based.
right, so if you watch 3 minutes of news and you hear something that was a complete opinion or didn't have a
Yeah,
lot of facts to back it up, you walk away like, wow, I guess that's what happened. And that's the end of it because you don't
yeah.
dive in anymore. So I'm probably jumping a little ahead on our conversation here, but
No, no, I mean,
hopefully you fit in there.
it's really, it is really hard because just because we don't hear about it, we think it doesn't exist. Or if they only give
Right.
a limited perception of it, then it's okay. I remember, and this is like this, it just blows me away because it was so earth shattering to me when I realized this. Because you hear about school shootings, and no matter when there's a school shooting, it's devastating. I mean, it's devastating when anybody loses their life. But whether it's a shooting or stabbing or whatever it is, right? I mean, it's just horrible. But the news picks one or two stories. They don't play all the
Mm,
stories.
no.
And they play that story up big. I mean, if they played all the shootings that happen in some of these cities like Chicago every weekend, people would be devastated. I don't know. I was reading a couple weekends ago. They said, yeah, the shootings this past weekend were 20 or something, 23 or something like that. And you just like, wow, like we don't hear about that. And I realized it came hit home. I was in the hospital, and I was because we grew up in the Philadelphia area, and watch Philly news. That's what mom and dad watch, right? So we heard the Philly news,
Yeah.
and you would hear very rare of shootings or stabbings, right? Once in a while they hit the news and it was a big thing, right? And so here I was, I had this severe right side pain, went into the hospital that night, and they're like, okay, we're not sure what's going on here. We're gonna do exploratory surgery. We're gonna take your appendix out, and we're just gonna, so that's what they decided to do, right? And it was midnight by the time they, what the hospitals are like, sometimes. And here we are, and then it got later, and that was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm still waiting, and then two, like almost like 1:30 or so, and I'm laying on the operating table. Like they're just, the staff's all hanging out around me, and I remember I'm like, so what are like we waiting for now? He's like, oh, we got to wait till the 2:15 hour or something, like I forget what the exact hour was. He goes, because this is when the bars close. He said, and this is usually when we get the gunshots or the stabbings, and we have to be on call because we might have to delay you in case any of those come in tonight. Wow. And I'm like, wait a minute, you do this every night? He's like, yeah, or at least on the weekends. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. We never hear that on news. Now, that was back in, I don't know, like the 80s somewhere, or 90s, maybe early 90s. And I was just blown away. I was like, wow, we really are sheltered into what we know is what's going on, right? And so the problem is, we go back and say, we don't know what we don't know. And then we're surprised when we find out about it, right?
So a good definition of deception is the act of causing someone to accept as true or valid what is false or invalid. The act of deceiving, resorting to falsehood and deception. So, I mean, that's the main definition. I don't think it's, that hard for most people to understand what deception really is by definition, or by things they've seen or heard or experienced in their lives. And, we kind of touched on it in the last episode we had, when we were kind of diving into the healthcare and everything going on. And when you look at that aspect, just to kind of bring another category in, look at the deception all around us. With, again, we talked about, we won't go deep in that again, but, the pharmaceutical world, are we being deceived by what it actually does helpful for our body, when all these other harmful things are done to our body because of a medication that we're told we need? Or we're deceived because maybe we don't need that medication, but we're told that we need it.
Yeah.
And then even the other part is the food industry. We're so deceived by, oh, this is a good product to eat. Sell this to your
it's
kids.
Healthy.
Right. It's full of all kinds of chemicals.
Or it's organic, because they can, and then people don't realize, like, they could put that organic label on if they've eliminated like 3 of the pests. I don't know the number, because I don't give a false number, because I don't want to see people, but it's a very limited number of pesticides or whatever that has to be on there to make that label, right? And then there's even a percentage label. If it doesn't reach a certain percentage, I don't know what the percentage, they don't even have to put the ingredients on the label.
Right.
Right. It's crazy. And then somebody was recently talking about the whole Made in America, that there was a law that was passed not too long ago. I don't know what year it was, but if it's repackaged in America, you could put on the label, it's now made in America. And so it's like, again, who would push that law? That makes no sense. But, well, we make people feel good about buying in America, even though it came from China or Japan or wherever else. And yeah, it's just, we know very little, is what I think. I continue to find out, we know less and less than we think we know.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, what's the almighty purpose? Is it the almighty dollar? If we deceive people into thinking this is healthy, we're going to make more money. If we deceive people into thinking this is a product or a prescription they need, and maybe they don't, we're going to make more money. I don't know what the end game is for all of the deception going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's power, money. I mean, those are probably the top 2 things that drives most, I would think, deceptive behavior ultimately.
It does. And what's amazing is how we find out things that are true, that we were like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that. I mean, I go back to like the gas crisis in the 70s, right? And find out it wasn't really a gas crisis. This was just a political thing, right? I remember, had the Karn lines and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we know there's plenty of oil now. It's just a matter of, right. And I bet so many people could tell stuff. I mean, when you said you didn't ever learn the Vietnam War because nobody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
Nobody want to talk about it. I remember talking to a guy, and he fought in Vietnam, and he says, we were told the war started in this year, and they were over there long before that. We just didn't know it as American people, because he was over there. So he's like, no, we were there. And just keep, and yet the funny thing is, like, we know this. And if you ask people, I don't know what the polls are, but if you ask people, the polls, like, do you trust the media? Oh, no, I don't trust the media. But then we do, right?
Yeah.
And we're based on, as you said, 3 minutes. That's amazing. So we get our news in 3 minutes. We go about our day, and oh yeah, this must be true. Wow, I'm glad our media. So when we talk about some of this deception without going into a lot of more detail, I think this hits a faith issue, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Because
definitely.
and it doesn't necessarily have to do with any faith in God. It's a faith in, do you trust the people that are giving you this information, right?
Hmm.
And can you trust the sources that are giving them the information? Because I think some people that are they're just, again, regurgitating what somebody else had said with no science to back it up, right? Or no information to back it up. Or how often now we're just throwing out the science. Who cares about the science? This is
Yeah,
what it is, right? And so it's becoming a faith in, who do you believe, right? And
right.
that's why personally, we'll get into this a little later, but I trust going back to the sources. Like, I really try to go
Hmm.
back to not a news media, not an interviewer, not get me to a source, get me to that person. I've been on the border. Get me to the person who I was in that country when that
Hmm.
happened, or get me the real person, right, or the real story, not just something of hearsay or something else, right? I
Well, I
think,
think too. Yeah, I mean, we're not going to apologize for being conservative Christians. So, I mean, we have certain beliefs, and again, when those beliefs are shattered, it's very hard to accept. And I think when it comes again to the media and trying to trust what you hear, like you said, it and go back to the source is the ultimate goal, and it should be. And unfortunately, journalism used to actually be that. You had a
yeah,
breaking story, and what did you have? You had the reporters went on scene to what was happening, talked to the people there that were experiencing it, and didn't give their opinion on it. They just said, "Here's
the
what's happening."
fact.
I miss the news when it
I do
used to
too.
just be, "Hey, here's the evening news. Here's the top 5 stories," and it was, here's the facts of what we know. We went into these different areas, we talked to these people, here's what we know based on what we found
Yeah,
out. It's not, hey, I think this should be this way, or I think this person did this, or I think that. Now all we have, like, I would say probably like 90% of the media is opinion media.
it
It's
is.
not
Yeah,
even based on fact. And even when you get some outlets that are giving you facts, they'll give their opinion with the facts. So it's still like,
and
okay,
taint
wait,
it.
yeah, so can I
Yeah,
trust that fact? Because now
yeah,
you just threw your opinion on it.
yeah,
So maybe you don't like that fact, or what you'll say is you'll say, okay, well, here's some of these facts here, but I don't really think that's accurate because
yeah,
I don't, so you're not really getting an accurate
yeah,
portrayal of what's actually supposed to be
yeah.
happening. So I think if we could go back to that, I don't know how to get back to that because I feel like the media is just so on the opposite side of where it should be anymore. I don't know where it went wrong or when it went wrong, but I do remember, as a kid or young adult, somewhere along the way when it was a lot more truthful than it is now.
Yeah, they seem to want to get to the bottom line, and that was, and all of us look back at some of those stories. We watch movies about those stories of when the media, when the journalists
Hmm.
broke the story and they got
Yeah.
to the truth, and we marvel at that. And now today, it's like it seems to be truth. It seems to be the least
Hmm.
objective, right? It's like, no, I just want to put my spin on it. Like, okay, there was this happened, but it really wasn't that bad because you got to look at this side of it. I mean, we have school shootings down. Instead of focusing on the victims and what they went through and the
Yeah.
families, we go off on political tangents. No matter which side you're on, it just
Right.
starts going off on a political tangent. It's like, dude, like, can you just forget all that now? You got plenty of time to deal with that. Let's just deal. Let's just be there for the families, right?
Hmm.
And then we should be there for the families that are getting shot in other cities all the time. Same thing, right? Yeah, it's hard to watch. I guess it's hard to watch and seeing, especially even the truth factors end up being lying once they get checked, right? And so now you're like, oh my goodness, it's like, wow. So it's hard. And I know, I think one of the greatest deceptions, and I hate when people say it because, and this is again coming from a faith background, right? But the term "listen to your heart," or just listen to your heart. What's your heart telling you, right? And it's put, oh my goodness, it's in 3-year-old cartoons, right? They start pushing that into you. Just
Hmm.
listen to your heart. In other words, go with what you feel. If it
Hmm.
feels right, then do it. If it feels wrong, then it's probably wrong. And we don't realize how much our emotions can mess that all up, right?
Well,
And
look at where that's put us today. I mean, we're in a whole new world because of really that philosophy of listening
yeah,
to your heart. What do your emotions say? Well, my emotions say I should do this or do that. Well, is
yeah,
that really truth though, or is that just how you feel?
yeah,
Or you offended me. Well, did I offend you because your heart said that you can't handle the truth that I just told you, or my opinion of what I said, or is there something really behind that? And I think it's really warped a lot of our culture today
Yeah.
to kind of stay in that world of, yeah, I
We,
mean, what is truth and what isn't? And I think that's a
yeah.
great question to add into this whole topic of deception. Is there is truth out there, but it's like, how can you even, it's almost like we're not allowed to talk about the truth anymore. Like, just
Yeah.
nope, that's what we said. Nope, you got to believe what he says or what she says because she feels that or she thinks that. So you have to understand and believe that too. And it's like, well, wait a minute though.
But what is
I'm not
truth?
living in that reality that they think they're
Yeah.
living in. I'm living in the real world, and my real world says that that is not true.
Yeah.
So who's being deceived? Are they trying to push me to be deceived by what they believe, or are they being deceived by what they believe? So it's a very interesting world out there, and I do, I think you do too. We'll dive in a little bit more, but I just want to mention it now. Like, you have to find various sources of what you're trying to find. You
Absolutely.
can't just, and like you said, you have to go to the source. I watch a lot of different videos of a lot of different people that are just independent, and they're going out on the streets, they're going to college campuses. And when you hear them talk to the people that are out there in our country, living in the streets, living on the college campuses, it's amazing to hear the responses on both sides of
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Whether it's a response I believe in or don't, it doesn't matter. But
Yeah.
to hear it from them really gives you a really good picture of
It's
what's going on.
it is real news. I think go back to
Yeah,
like you said, there's very little news out there. I think there still is. It's just so pushed down and hidden because it doesn't fit a narrative that we
yeah,
continually be bombarded with, right? And some of the news sources, since we had this topic here, some news sources I love listening to are the ones where I can read the article and then it will say, okay, well, it says, because we both read a lot on health and nutrition and stuff like that. So I don't want to read this person's opinion. I mean, that's
yeah.
nice because he's a medical doctor. He went to whatever. I want to see where they got the source because they're saying this. So, okay, show me the report, show me the data. And not that I'm, again, I can't understand half that stuff, but I at least want to see a little bit of
Hmm.
it so I can say, oh, okay, this isn't this person's opinion. Here's the facts. Here's the raw
Hmm.
facts showing 20,000 people were interviewed or 20,000 people were in this study and this is what was done instead of, oh, did you know that? And then they give you a truth, but then you find out there were only 5 people in that study and whatever else, and you're like, wow, that wasn't all revealed before. So
Hmm.
I love getting to the sources. And I just think that's very helpful when we do get to those sources.
Yeah, I think it's hard because you look at everybody Googles everything. And I have patients that like, oh, my back was hurting, so I Googled some exercise. And it's like, but how did you check who's doing that? Like, do you know who's showing you how to do these exercises? Is it somebody that knows what they're doing, or is it just somebody that you just found the first video? And we're all kind of guilty of it because it's a quick, easy way to do it. But again, how much information out there is so false, and you're just like, oh, well, so watch the video on how to change my dishwasher, so I guess that's how I do it. Like, what if that
Yeah.
person was never even did that in his life,
Yeah.
or never even played around with plumbing before,
Yeah.
and they're teaching you how to change a dishwasher out?
Yeah.
So it's hard to find it, and it's unfortunately it's so easy to find it, but it's so hard to find out what is true and what you're finding. And like you said, you got to keep digging in deeper or try to look. What I've realized over the last several years is I've tried to find out more about, like, what is really going on in our country and our world, like from a news perspective. What I started finding out was, like, when I found some of these more independent sources, and you start hearing like three, four, five of them all kind of saying the same type of thing. They're not connected to any major media outlet. They're all kind of on
Yeah.
their own. And if they're all diving in, actually doing the research, actually exploring what's going on, and they all kind of have that same response, same answer, it kind of makes me feel like, okay, they probably did figure this out because they're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
They're pretty much in conjunction with each other, and they're not even associated with each other. So to me, it's like, okay, maybe that's the real story.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of the big guys sharing the same story that
Yeah,
they all go after the other person.
yeah,
You're like, wait a minute, that's not even a story anymore. Yeah. And how much we're limited. We live in such a bubble here in the United States. It's crazy. We just don't hear what's going on in other countries, and we
yeah.
have we have no idea. I mean, that's why it was good when we had AC, Katera on, a few episodes back, where you just got a different view of the country of Lebanon and what it was like that
Hmm.
day. Now it's a whole different story. What's going on there is horrible, but well, it was back then too. But it's neat to hear some of these other perspectives. And we need that. We need to listen to other
Yeah,
people outside of
we
our own
do.
perspectives, you know.
Yeah, we do.
But, you know, come from a faith background too. I know this hits home with me because, you know, coming out of a religious background, okay, and I know, you know, some of our listeners might be very religious, and that's where you are in your spiritual journey. But I remember coming out of that saying, I don't want to believe what somebody tells me anymore. I want to
Mm,
know what God actually says about it. And that was the biggest, I think, spiritual battle I ever went through was, do I believe someone's opinion or history of an organization, church or otherwise, or do I believe literally what the word of God says? And when I came to that conclusion, it was like, I don't want to be deceived anymore. I don't want to be deceived. I don't want anybody to deceive me anymore. So I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to, because I don't know what I don't know, and I can
mm,
easily be deceived. So I want to know more. I want to dig deeper, and I always want to go back to, for, you know, for me, and I know for you too, Brian, you know, it's like we want to go back to the word of God, because then we
yeah.
know there's a basis, there's a solid for what we, you know, what we believe and understand. And part of this ties back into what we're talking about here is we have a reality of this world. And I think we're all taught that people are basically good,
Hmm.
right? And so that's a mentality that we've been taught from the time we were little. What's interesting, going back to the health field, it's hard, or not all our topics always overlap, right? You're right, the health thing, and what we were talking about with some of the stuff going on in the health industry and stuff like that, that's not working, right? We know it's not working, right? Because people are getting sicker and sicker. We're one of the sickest countries, like, you know, around, right? Compared to what we spend on health and health care, and is oh man, lost the dude. Where was I going with that? Deception. Oh, dude, keep going. Talk.
All right. So I was going to say, like, how do we tie this back in then? So what does it look like if our heart isn't, if we're not supposed to follow our heart, then what do we follow? And for you, like you said, I mean, again, I'm not going to be ashamed of the fact that I believe in God, and Christ is my Savior, and the Bible is truth. And for us that believe that, the Bible is absolute truth,
Yeah,
and that's about the only thing we can go back to try to find it. And for those of you who think the Bible doesn't have anything to do with anything, if you go in it, it pretty much has something to do with everything that we face in our lives, whether it's money, whether it's relationships, whether it's business, whether it's finance. Everything that we have to deal with in life is in there somewhere. And to have that to lean back on and say, okay, well, I feel like I'm not sure what's going on over here because I'm hearing five different opinions on this. Where is the truth? Well, the truth, I got to go back to the word and see the truth. And like you said, it's so easy to hear people and just believe, okay, that sounds pretty good, but maybe I should go and find the source out first. And I do, I'll throw our own world of Christianity under the bus a little bit. There's a lot of pastors that are out there that are very good that talk and preach, and obviously people are listening to them. So if they're influenced by that leader, by that preacher, just like in other worlds of, leadership, finance, political, whatever, you have people that are listening to you and respecting you enough that they're going to believe what you're saying. So if
yeah,
they have truth behind what they're saying, great. But what if they don't and you're still believing it? So when a pastor will get up and say, "Listen, don't shoot the messenger. I'm telling you what God's word says. I'm just saying it. So don't believe me. Go back in the word and find it for yourself what I'm talking about." And I
yeah.
love when they say that because again, that puts so much more truth into what we are being taught or what we're believing.
Yeah, to go back to what I was saying, tying into this is, so from a biblical mindset or biblical view, we are not by nature good,
Hmm.
because we have propensity towards doing things wrong. And we all, and if we really take a close look at ourselves, we know that. We get into a conversation, we walk away from it, and like, oh man, I talked about myself more than I asked about the other person, right? We're just selfish by nature, right?
Hmm.
And we have to fight against that. We have to continue to fight against that. So it's interesting how the world is portraying us as good people. By nature, most people are good. Yet you see the terrorism and all that kind of stuff go up. We say, well, they can't be that evil. Well, they are. I mean, they literally are.
Hmm.
How does a terrorist organization come into a country like Israel and just behead, decapitate, and all that kind of stuff? And like, it's just evil, right? It's pure evil. And we don't, we struggle with that in our nature, so it's easy to bypass it. And on the flip side, where I was going with the health is, on the health side, we think from the time we're born we're going to end up being sick, right? Isn't that interesting?
Mm.
So therefore, we're going to give you these meds from the time you're born, right? Or vaccines or anything, right? And then as you get older, we're just assuming you're going to go on this bed and this bed and this bed and this bed. And I think we shared those stats when we were talking about that last time was, 75% adults, right? For age 50 to 64 are on medications. 89% of those 65 and older are on medications. There's something wrong with the system, right? And somehow we think the body's broken, but somehow our spirit is still right. Where when we come from a biblical mindset, the idea is, no, they're both broken, right? Our spirits are broken. We're born into being selfish, and our bodies are broken too. They're gonna mess up. They're part of a fallen world that things aren't that great. And yet the flip side is God made these bodies amazing that if we take good care of them, they will bounce back a lot more than we'd ever expect. And on the flip side, when it comes to our spiritual nature too, as we start to follow God, we tend to not be as selfish, right? We could be less self-focused. We could be more other people oriented. And then when it comes to deception, which we're talking about, I think what happens is we can end up becoming less deceived too.
Yeah.
Because we're seeking the truth, go back to the word,
I just heard somebody say that, and I don't remember what the stat was on it, but apparently a very large percentage, I'm not sure if it's more than half or less than half, of people that are dealing with mental illness have realized that looking at things from a biblical worldview has helped them and find it to be positive. And again, a lot of people could disagree with us on it, and that's fine. But I think that the point of that is that again, that's the reality. We can go back to a reality that there is a God that we serve, that loves us, that died for us, that wants us to be with Him, that wants to give us purpose in life. So if
Yeah.
the world is telling us, no, 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 you need to have all the money you want. No, 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 you need to have all the houses you want. And
Yeah.
hey, let's dive into you need to look like this, and you need to have this makeup, and you need to wear this, and you need to be like this and this. And especially, for the female population, that is a lot on them. There's a lot on
Yeah.
that for them to want to look or feel or be like this other person. And as guys, we don't necessarily have as much of that. I mean, there's definitely some of that innate in us as well. But again, it's what does that bring you? Is that bringing you happiness? Does that bring you purpose in life because you can look like a celebrity? And if you have enough cars, you feel like you have worth. So understanding that, like again, that's a huge deception that the world has given us, and it's just not in our
Yeah.
country. I mean, that's a worldview
Yeah.
of like you need to have stuff, you need to be popular, you need to be famous to have purpose in life. When ultimately, for us as Christians, luckily, that's what gives us the peace is that our only purpose is in Christ, and He's called us to die to self and live for Him. So you can't be selfish if you want to have a relationship with Jesus. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that it doesn't happen every day to have to fight through that because again, like you said, Ken, we're
Yeah.
we're selfish by nature. We're not really good by nature. And when you say good, like I like the example you gave, was just, it doesn't have to be, terrible. It could be as simple as, oh, I hogged the conversation. I just talked
Yeah.
about me. Like that's a simple thing, but again,
Yeah.
it's a selfish act.
Yeah.
It's not like, cheating on your spouse, but it's a selfish act. So there's so many little pieces of that. And again, if the world is telling us that you need to be this, and at the end, what's the end result? Whereas we can go back to God's word and say, no, we're supposed to be like Christ. And we have to keep trying to be like that every day of our lives. And it's a struggle. It's a big struggle. We're by no means any better than anybody else just because we believe in Jesus Christ as our Savior. We're no better. We
Yeah.
just know more of what we need to do than people who don't understand the Bible or understand God.
Yeah.
We're always trying to seek to that, but it's a struggle.
Yeah. And part of this goes back to deception too.
Mm,
We live in a world that tells you don't follow faith. That's garbage. It's just a crutch and all that kind of stuff. And yet, man, you go back to studies. I mean, how many studies show that those who have a faith based
mm,
are healthier people? Those who have a faith based have better marriages, right?
yeah.
And those who are faith based raise better families. It's you can't, the stats are out there, like they really are. Um, it's amazing what a faith does. And then this goes back to the whole topic of deception that I think we can easily be deceived, not only into following a world, but allowing the world to teach us things that are not true and not real. And I know, I mean, Jesus told us to not be deceived.
Mm,
right? I mean, he said, "Don't be deceived." And I think one of the things, we had done a little episode where we just touched on the whole topic of, the return of Christ and end times kind of thing. And one of the things he continually said in the end when he's talking about, towards the end when it gets really close, right? He continues to say, don't be deceived, right? Because there will be people who will rise up who will try to deceive you. Why? It's to their own purpose, their own gain. And the more people that they could control, the more control they have. It's that kind of stuff. And people get swept up in it too. I think there's a lot of innocent people that get swept up in it. I don't think they intentionally wake up in the morning and say, "Oh man, who am I going to deceive today?" But when you think of what's going on in the world, there's a lot of deceptions, and I think this goes back to, and I know here we're opening some scripture here, which is pretty cool. But when Jesus was tempted by Satan in the desert, and I know no matter what your faith background is, you probably have heard this story, right? Right? Would you agree? Most people have probably
Oh
heard
yeah,
this story,
yeah.
right? This is one of the stories up there, like Noah and the ark and all that kind of stuff, right? And Jesus went out and he was tempted by Satan, and Satan came and tempted him, and something about bread and something about stones. I don't know what it all was, because, but anyway, one of the things that the enemy did was, and I'm going to read right from this. This is the Gospel of Matthew, and so Matthew is one of Jesus's followers. He is the one who penned this down. He wrote it, and he says that the devil took him to a very high mountain. This is Jesus in the wilderness being tempted, and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me." And we could easily look over that and say, okay, well, Jesus said no, and we move on, and we miss the reality of what the enemy is saying. And Jesus did not correct him that the kingdoms of this world belong to the enemy. They are under the enemy's influence. And it doesn't mean that good people don't get in there. It doesn't mean that God does not use bad people when he needs them. And we can rattle off some stories. I mean, what are some stories that we know from our faith journey of people, heroes in the Bible that were not the greatest guys? Actually, I don't know if there's anybody outside of Jesus who was like really good. Like nobody even comes close, do they?
No, I mean you can rattle them all off, and again, people may know or may not know about them. I mean, you're talking about David, you're talking about Moses, you're talking about
Yeah.
Samson. I mean, there's that. That's why again, for people who don't believe in the Bible or think it's just a bunch of stories, what's amazing is God used people all throughout history, and He used them in ways that were benefiting for Him and His kingdom, but he used people that you would never think of. I mean, even Moses. Let's go to Moses. I mean, most people know who Moses was, know what he did. He freed the Israelites. So, here's a guy that was basically was supposed to be killed by order of the law at that time, and his mom put him in a basket and threw him down the river, and he got adopted by an Egyptian family. Grew up
Yeah.
as an Egyptian in royalty,
which
and
is
then
which is go back just a little bit. So their faith and their belief in what God was calling them to do said, we will defy what our government, right,
mm-hmm,
is commanding us to do, that
yeah,
all the children must be thrown in the Nile to be killed, because that was the edict coming out of Egypt.
right.
And they said, no, we're not going to do it. And they trusted God would do something with that. And here they are, yeah, putting him in a basket. And like you said, he got got into the palace. It
Yeah,
was
and
pretty
then
amazing.
he grows up Egyptian, and he's a royalty, and then all of a sudden he starts to realize that a Jewish person who was enslaved in Egypt was being mistreated, and he goes off and he kills the Egyptian.
Yeah,
So
because he
now he
realizes he realizes what he realized the deception, that he is not Egyptian, he is
right,
Hebrew,
yeah.
and
So then
all those years he was deceived by his own
yeah.
family. Right?
So then what does he
Wow.
do? He goes, he runs, right? Does that
Yeah.
sound like the Christian thing to do? No. But he runs off and he hides in the wilderness for 40 years
Yeah.
before God finally calls him back. And then, the rest of the story, you probably all know, is he frees the Egyptians.
Yeah.
So, I mean, somebody like that who's a murderer and God still used him. So it's amazing who and what God can do with people.
Yeah.
So we should never discredit that. And again, like you said, I mean, that's a great example of deception. He was deceived himself. And again, I think a lot of that goes back. We're all deceived in different ways, but who is the great deceiver?
Yeah.
And what do we do with that? I think it's interesting too, because for a lot of people who really don't want to believe in God or talk about God, it seems like they're still okay with understanding that there's a devil out there. Like
Yeah,
they
they
can
do.
almost understand that there is Satan and there's a bad figure out there, and
Yeah,
something like that's okay. But the God person,
yeah,
I don't really believe in that.
yeah,
It's just interesting to me, and I've talked to several people who really don't have a lot of faith, but yet they somehow still believe in
yeah,
Satan or something like that. And again, most people, I think, even non-faith based people or people that walked away from the faith, they can still understand the deception of Adam and Eve.
yeah,
They can still understand that story, and again, that's really where it all began.
yeah. Yeah. Side note, though, I have to just say this. 'Cause talk about deception. I think one of the deceptions that go on in our society too is the older you get, the more useless you are. And I think
Mm.
Moses is one of the greatest stories. Man, the dude was 80 years old when he really started the story that we know about him. Okay, so
Yeah,
his best years of his life were in his 80s. So don't believe that deception.
great point.
So Paul gives us a. We should probably start wrapping up. Paul gives us a
Yeah,
couple things, and so to those, if you come from a faith base, these hopefully mean a lot to you and something you take home with. And to those who may not, may just be a chance to explore a little bit into the scriptures. And Paul was, talk about people deceived. Paul was a man who hated Christians. He literally was out to attack
mm,
them. He persecuted them. He murdered them. Maybe not personally, but he was the one behind the executions of the Christians. And then guess what? God got a hold of him and he realized the deception and what he was doing. He repents and, man, comes to faith in Christ. And he writes these words. He says, "See that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on a human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces." Again, he brings it up. There's spiritual forces at work of this world rather than on Christ. And so he recognizes there are spiritual forces that are work that are deceiving us, and they're part of our just our culture in which we live. And that comes from Colossians 2:8, by the way, Paul's letter to the church in Colossae. One of the other ones I'll bring up,
yeah. I think
and this hit me. I was listening. Go ahead, Brian.
no. I was just gonna say, just a side note, going back to Paul again. Most of the early Christian church was, they were Jewish people of Jewish faith, and here
Yeah,
Paul was a Jewish believer. He grew up in that. He knew the Word. He knew the Old Testament in and out. He was very well versed in it, and yet here's a guy that was going out and killing Christians or having them killed, and still God turned around and used him. So again, another amazing story of that.
yeah. So Paul writes this warning later, and he is talking about, and this is really powerful because I don't think people realize, especially even as Christians, how powerful the enemy really is at deception. And Paul's writing a letter to the Corinthian church. This is his second letter that we find in scriptures. And he says, "But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve," so he's going all the way back to creation, um, "deceived Eve by his craftiness." And so if you don't know what that means, go back and read the book of Genesis, first few chapters, you'll read the whole story. By his craftiness, your minds will be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. For if one comes and preaches, and listen to all these things, this is amazing, comes and preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or receive a different spirit which we have not received, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you bear this beautifully. And so literally this church, so here, I mean, they're talking to the church. So as you were listening to her, like anti-church or all that kind of stuff, Paul, I mean, most of the letters that Paul wrote were to the churches that were messing up. They were messing up. They were trying, but they're messing up, and he's writing them. And here he's talking about there is another Jesus that people talk about. And we create our own Jesus. I don't think the Jesus that would do that is the Jesus I would follow. So we create our own Jesus, right? Another spirit. There's a spirit that's at work that is not the Holy Spirit. It's not God. And there's another gospel. It is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is another gospel. And people are falling from it or falling for it. And I think we're in the midst of a world today where a lot of deception is going on. And what began in the garden continues to permeate our culture and our world, and deception is still going on. And so we don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
And I think we got to keep coming back to
So I
that.
think as we wrap this up here, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think, as we're starting to wrap this up here, I think the biggest thing for us to kind of, share with our listeners again is, as far as taking a mulligan, taking a second chance. I think a lot of that's going to do with, from what we talked about today is the second chance of trying to find out more information. Don't
Yeah.
just believe everything you hear from someone. Check the sources. Dive in a little bit deeper and try to figure out exactly what you need to know, because, like you said, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. And it doesn't matter what, as you're saying, it doesn't matter what view or what political spectrum you're on. It doesn't matter because a lot of times people jump on a bandwagon so quick, and guess what? A little later they find out it was wrong, right? So, and not that you
Yeah.
should believe something when you first hear it because it could be true, but sometimes give it a little time because it may come out to say, "Oh no, that wasn't true at all," or yes, that absolutely was true. And what somebody else was saying about it all being lies and deception and some kind of conspiracy theory, guess what? It wasn't. And it came out to be true. So, yeah. So great advice, Brian. Take a mulligan, listen to another source. So, any last comments, Brian? You want to wrap it up?
No, just to be careful what you listen to and what you hear, and like you said, I mean, a lot of stuff might come out that's true, and the sad part is that most people that make that mistake or don't give you all the truth don't usually admit it. So it'd be nice if we had a little bit more accountability on that.
We know everyone can use a second chance or a do-over. So take a mulligan and try again. Thanks so much for joining with us today. Make sure you follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Like, click, and subscribe.